I've lost like 10 to 15 pounds of pure fat over the past 4 months, and I've learned a ton in the process. And it is fascinating. Like, here's the deal. Food quality is, I think, the primary variable. It's super, super important. What you eat determines, by and large, how much you eat. And most people are completely naive to that concept, right? We've seen, and I've already mentioned this, that people who consume ultra-processed foods as the bulk of their diet, by the time you've eaten them to satiety, you've already overconsumed them. Conversely, by focusing on minimally processed foods, like whole foods, you reach a point of satiety where you're either at energy balance or even slightly below, which is what that Kevin Hall study showed, that people who consumed primarily in this crossover study minimally processed foods, they came in effortlessly at a calorie deficit. And yet they were just as satiated as the ultra-processed food, intervention. And so you can and should be able to maintain a perfectly healthy body composition, a lean body composition, by focusing primarily on food quality. Now, that is today, to be clear, a form of restriction, right? So like that is a form of restriction in and of itself. You have to restrict yourself to some degree of these ultra-processed foods, which are seemingly everywhere. 73% of the food items at your local supermarket now, machine learning has showed us in a study recently published, are ultra-processed. So, I mean, by and large, the food supply is like foods designed to make you overconsume them. But to get like even leaner than that, if you so choose to, which is not necessarily going to be a health decision, but instead, maybe an aesthetic decision or maybe just a personal challenge that you want to set for yourself, you do have to become a little bit more discerning and diligent about where your calories are coming from. And so, another form of restriction, if you want to call it that, is, I, a couple of months ago, started eating home a lot more often. And it's not that I'm like some big extravagant, like I go to, fancy restaurants all the time. No, I just eat out. Like I go to, a lot of fast casual restaurants. I'll get like a salad here and there from like one of these salad chains. And the amount of phantom fat calories that you ingest when eating out regularly is just like, is massive. It's massive. It's like a completely underappreciated source of empty calories. The same way that, drinking soda, a soft drink, adds a ton of empty calories in the form of sugar to your body, which nobody essentially needs. I mean, eating out generally is going to provide phantom calories in the form of fat. And so by eating home, I saw, more frequently, I saw, a significant portion of like my body fat just like melt off. But then, I wanted to get a little bit more diligent just to try for my own edification, just my own challenge to myself, because I'm not an athlete, I'm not a bodybuilder. I'm not one of these like biohacker guys that like makes a living showing myself shirtless on social media. That is not who I am, right? But I wanted to see, like, were I to, want to get to a more quote unquote shredded state, like what would it take? And so, I started to realize that like, fat calories add up really quickly, and you do need fat. Fat is crucially important for digestion. You want to continue to be able to digest your fat-soluble vitamins and a lot of these fat-soluble plant compounds. You need fat to allow the gallbladder to contract and release, bile. Like, you don't want to create gallstones. You want to keep your hormones optimal. But I think by and large, what a lot of people might have expected me to have done would be to cut out carbohydrates. A lot of people think that it's like cutting carbs. Carbs make you fat. But if you look at what any bodybuilder does when prepping for their shows, I mean, granted, there are probably some exceptions to this. There are exceptions to this, but like mostly they're gonna start at the very beginning, at least, cutting out the fat calories because oil is so calorie dense and fat is so calorie dense, right? You actually want to keep your carbohydrates up, because the primary way to tell your body to shed the fat and to hold on to the muscle is to continue to keep your workout intensity up. And what fuels your workouts? Carbohydrates. So I learned a lot about the role of carbs and fats in this process over the past 4 months. But by and large, I saw the biggest wins with reducing my intake of fat calories. So I started eating more lean meats, as opposed to the fattier cuts that I typically would have indulged in multiple times a week. Like multiple times a week, I was eating like ribeyes and things like that, which I love ribeyes. Ribeyes are great, just to be clear. And I was already at a healthy body composition. But by switching from ribeyes to leaner cuts, like strip steaks, tenderloins, sirloin steak, what have you, again, like you're cutting out a ton of fat calories, and you're still getting fat in the steak, to be clear. And I'm still getting fat elsewhere in my diet, egg yolks and the like. But you're just reducing the fat calories, optimizing for protein calories. And then I started swapping a lot of like the dairy products that I was consuming for fat-free. Now, to be clear, the research does support full-fat dairy in terms of cardiometabolic health. So when we look at the population level, it's clear based on observational data that full-fat dairy consumers seem to have better cardiometabolic health than low and reduced fat dairy. But as I've mentioned earlier, correlation doesn't equal causation. So why might this be? Well, low fat and reduced fat dairy are ultra processed, tend to be more processed, right? And so oftentimes people who consume more processed foods, well, there's what's called healthy user bias. So maybe they're consuming more, their diet is more processed in general. Maybe those low fat and fat-free dairy products are really high in added sugar, like the low fat and fat-free yogurts that, are so readily available today, and which everybody seems to think are actually good for you, right? But if you take a fat-free Greek yogurt, there's nothing that I could think of that's unhealthy about that. It's essentially like a protein supplement. I mean, it's like for 80 calories, you're getting 18 grams of protein, no fat calories, which you could put towards like, you could have the ribeye, because you've got to economize, right? And yeah, I found a milk product called Fairlife, which, a lot of people, I have no affiliation with this company, but like in an 80 calorie cup, it's like 13 grams of protein and it tastes like whole milk. It's like amazing. And so I started to make all these like little tweaks in my diet without tracking anything, without like tracking calories, keeping a running tab of like how much protein I'm getting over a 24-hour period. And the fat just like literally like started to melt off. And I was like, this is actually like really easy and really fun. And holy cow, I'm like at 10% body fat, which is like the leanest I've ever been. And then I just kept going and I got to about 9%, which is what you see on my Instagram, which I posted on my birthday, May 29th. People can go over and check it out. But yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. And the whole time I kept my carbohydrates up. So I'm not on a zero carb. I'm not on a ketogenic diet. I kept my carbs up so that I could continue to feel energized in the gym, which is super, super important. A lot of people, this is a huge mistake that a lot of people make when trying to lose fat. They change their workouts. They think that, I'm like now starting a fat loss phase. I've got to increase the amount of reps that I'm doing to tone. Huge mistake. You don't want to change your workouts at all. The same exercises and regimen that's going to optimize your muscle growth is the same that's going to help to maintain it when you're in a fat loss phase. So you want to continue to lift heavy. Don't make the assumption, like so many do, that you're just going to get weaker. I mean, actually, some probably do get weaker when they start a fat loss phase because they start cutting out the carbohydrates, right? Keep your carbohydrates as high as you can while also getting adequate fat and hitting your protein threshold, which we've discussed earlier. And you'll see that you actually don't get weaker. Like in the gym, you actually provided you're getting enough protein, you might actually there's even the potential that you can gain a little bit of muscle while losing fat. So I've learned a ton about this, and it's become one of my favorite topics to talk about because because I've had to check a few of my own biases, going into this process. But yeah, I'm the leanest that I've ever been in my entire life, and also I haven't lost any muscle. I'm not gaining a ton of strength in this phase, but I haven't lost any muscle. I haven't lost any strength. And I've gotten I'm the leanest I've ever been.
What initially triggered this? Was it your 41st birthday was coming up and you wanted to get in great shape for that, kind of like midlife crisis type of thing? Or what was it?
Oh my God, don't say that. Oh God, I hope I'm not in my midlife yet. I think hopefully I've got a few, maybe I am, I don't know. No, it wasn't that. It was honestly that it was it was just after New Year's. Well, it was two things actually. One, I bought a bathing suit and I took a selfie of myself in the bathing suit, and I didn't think I looked like. I thought I looked really soft, and I was like, I thought to myself, like I want to look more like Daniel Craig in Casino Royale. Like that's how I envisioned myself. And so I took this photo of myself in a bathing suit, and I was like, I'm a nutrition expert. Like, I mean, I don't call myself a nutrition expert, but like this is what I do professionally. Like I know about nutrition, right? If I can't get myself into like the kind of shape that I want to be in, like what hope is there for anybody else, So that was part of it. And then after the new year, I was in this place in my personal life where I was spending a lot more time kind of on my own. Like I'm very close to my family, but like my brothers both kind of entered these like serious relationships, and one of my brothers actually just had like a baby. And so I was like spending a lot more time like eating home. And I was like, I'm eating home. I've got like all the variables under control. Let's just like, and it was like just after the new year, so people were like back to work. It was like kind of like a back to work vibe. Like people weren't like going out as much in my social life. And so I was like, I'm eating home. I'm already like, this is already like the primary variable that makes it difficult for people to lose the weight. Like it's like that they are eating out of the house too much. Here I am, like I'm eating home. Let's see what I can do. Like if I like really roll up my sleeves and try to get like as lean as I can get, like let's see how, maybe it's going to be incredibly difficult. I don't know, because I've never done this before. And I just rolled up my sleeves and I got to work, and I just like, I hit the protein threshold that I know based on the data I need to be hitting. I didn't change my workouts at all. I increased my, my walking quite a bit. So not cardio, not like running. I don't run. I'm not like I don't actually enjoy cardio. I enjoy lifting weights. But I increased my walking. Walking is like fat loss magic because it doesn't really increase your hunger all that much, and it's low intensity. So it oxidizes primarily fat, which, at the end of the day, the fat you lose or gain is determined by energy balance. But it's a fat burning exercise modality that can be easily sustained. It's easily sustainable. Almost anybody can walk. And the reward to agony ratio is just so high, with walking. Like with running, yeah, there's huge reward, but the agony, like the agony quotient goes up also significantly with running. So it can be easily sustained, and it also allows you to preserve your energy. This is super important. It allows you to preserve your energy for lifting, which is, again, the signal that tells your body to hold on to the muscle and ditch instead the fat. And so walking is like I think, incredible to do for like a fat loss phase. I think so many people make the mistake of like, I'm going to lose fat, so I'm going to start running now. Just start walking. It's all you need to do. Start walking. Yeah.
I love walking, and you might find this as a podcaster too. One of the things I love about it is before a chat like this, I usually listen to whoever my guest is on a few shows and read the book. And that gives me time to be out in nature, get some sun, move my body. It's just the perfect thing to get out and consume quote unquote work at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I listen to podcasts. It makes the time go by effortlessly. It really is incredible. It's incredible. It's like you want it to be low intensity. You want it to be sustainable. You want it to not be so depleting as to take your, your energy, which is a finite resource, away from your strength training. And yeah, it's great. So I increased that. And then I just started like, adopting all these like little tweaks. I cut the fat calories primarily. And I really started to, put more emphasis on food quality and protein and yeah, it's been really great. And I feel great. Like you often hear that when people get really lean, it doesn't feel as good. It's like, they're walking around feeling depleted. I mean, I feel the best I've ever felt. And when I start to feel depleted, what's part of the plan is I do what are called refeeds. which give me like a break psychologically from, over the course of this process from the dieting phase. It's not a cheat meal. I'm not going off the rails because I don't really like over the course of this process, I haven't eliminated any foods that I love. Like I haven't restricted myself from eating foods that I love. So I don't feel like I need to like restrict and then binge or anything like that. But, I take days deliberately a couple times a week where, I increase my carbohydrates even more, which is super fun to do. Most of the indulgent foods that we enjoy, they tend to be carbohydrate rich foods, maybe fat rich too, maybe some ice cream here and there, whatever. But like you increase back to like, to like your maintenance calorie intake, and you get this like rush of glycogen into your muscles. You look great the next day when you go to the gym. It gives you, a ton of energy. It gives you a break. Primarily, it gives you a break psychologically. It can potentially help to reverse some of the metabolic adaptation that occurs when you're dieting, when you're getting like really lean. So this is not going to be a problem. This isn't going to be an issue for most people, but when you get really lean, like when you get to like below 10% body fat, or even above that, but if you diet too rapidly, you can adapt. There's what's called metabolic adaptation. Adaptive thermogenesis is like one of the components of this, where maybe you'll see. So actually, it tends to be subconscious. You like move less, you have less energy, less fidgeting, less. You just have like less energy to do things. So one of these like once a week or whatever, like a refeed day where you bring your carbohydrates way up back to like maintenance calories, can be really helpful to help with like diet adherence and what have you. So yeah, so I've learned to talk. This is not something that like long term I'm going to be on, but my goal is to like maintain like the new leanness that I have. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I guess the take home message would be that like it was way easier than I thought. And this is just for me. I'm not speaking for anybody else. Like I've never had, I've never been obese. I've never, struggled with that. But yeah, with these tips, I think like, dispelling a lot of the misinformation that's out there. Like, for example, that you need to like make your favorite foods off limits, that like, you need to cut out all carbohydrates or all fat completely. I mean, those are big, I think, misconceptions, I love the idea of flexible dieting with the understanding that food quality should be like the primary variable that you modulate. But like, flexible dieting, I think, is something that I've had Alan Aragon on my podcast, who's a big advocate for this. He's a big evidence-based nutrition, he's like a goat in the nutrition space. There's a lot of good data on this. It's not rocket science. It's like, one of the things that I did, aside from look at the data, I looked at like how bodybuilders prep for shows, and success leaves clues, Jesse, like, this is, again, it's not like rocket science. I think there's a lot to be learned from the way that these like professional physique competitors get into like the amazing shape that they get into for their competitions.
Which is a perfect segue where I want to go with this. The fact that you are somebody, and it becomes really obvious as you share this part of your journey, the fact that working out and resistance training is a big part of this transformation. And why I want to bring this up is a lot of people aren't going to prioritize their time or have the time to work out like that. And if they start, keeping their carbohydrates the same and they're trying to lose weight or even bringing those up a bit, that could be a problem if they're not using their body and moving their body. So what I'm getting at here is, how big of a piece do you consider the resistance training as part of this transformation?
Oh my God, resistance training is like, it's so important. I mean, resistance training is like, now I'm biased. Everybody has their own, favorite workout modality. Mine is definitely going to be resistance training. Like I've just loved it for as long as I've been an adult. But no, it is really important because it provides the stimulus for your body to both grow and maintain its muscle mass. Muscle is, metabolically incredibly expensive. I mean, it burns calories just sitting on your frame. So, when you enter a calorie deficit, which is, first law of thermodynamics, like if you want to lose fat, you have to, that's going to be part of what needs to be achieved, is a calorie deficit. Your body's going to want to like shed what it can to ensure that you don't starve to death, right? Like your brain is a massively hungry energy consumer, accounting for 25% of your basal metabolic rate. And, obviously other tissues like are massive energy consumers as well. But like muscle is like, provided you have enough muscle to like get up and move about the world, like it's pretty expendable because you could always grow new muscle later, We have what are called satellite cells. Everybody, people are probably familiar with the concept of muscle memory. But in a fat loss phase, unless you're resistance training, you're going to shed muscle. And what you don't want after a cutting phase is to just look like a smaller version of yourself. You don't want that. You want to look like, I'm assuming that anybody who wants to do this wants to come out on the other end looking shredded, right? Like, and so you want to continue to lift weights to maintain that muscle, which your body will do, provided you're providing it the appropriate stimulus. And again, you want to continue lifting with intensity. So like, continuing to lift the heavy weights and focusing on the big compound movements, crucially important.
And by the sounds of it, you're in the middle of this quote unquote experiment. I think you mentioned you're around 9% body fat. I'm not sure how much longer you plan on doing it. It sounds like it is an experiment, and I'm sure there's certain things you'll take and apply for years to come. What I'm getting at here is, do you fear that body fat percentage is going to continue to come down to a point where you're going to have to start seeing that as a negative?
My goal is to maintain what I've achieved. I'm not really trying to get to like competition level leanness or anything like that. But it's really to maintain, because I've learned, as you've alluded to, I've learned a lot, and I've learned things that I'm going to take with me like now for the rest of my life. And I think one of the greatest benefits of this process isn't even necessarily that I've gotten to this, quote unquote low body fat percentage. And there are people that get way more shredded and are way bigger, so I'm not like some, but my goal is really to show people that it's possible. Like, I don't have like incredible genetics. I'm not even particularly strong. Like, I just, it was all through dedication and discipline and having patience and perseverance. But I've learned a lot, and I now have, most importantly, the skill. Like I've attained the skill of knowing how to modulate my body fat in this way. Like some days I'll want to have like the ribeye. Maybe multiple days. Like I'll probably, if I go on vacation, I'm not going to worry about it because I know that like all the carbohydrates that I'll be eating on vacation are going into to fuel my workouts. I think in the past, my focus was primarily on the preservation of cognitive health, the optimization of cognitive health and metabolic health. And that's, and also when looking at population statistics, when you see, data that suggests that we are by and large a metabolically ill society, I think like the low-hanging fruit for most people is going to be, again, focusing on food quality and all the things that I've said throughout the years. Like bringing, like getting rid of the food fear and bringing back to the table some of these foods that we've been told for decades should be off limits, right? Like eggs, red meat, things like that. So dispelling a lot of those myths. But yeah, I mean, I guess there was like a part of myself that was always curious about like, the more body composition side of things, the more performance aspect, the performance related side of things. And so, so I don't know. I mean, I think like, I wouldn't want to get too lean because, first of all, getting very lean is not, there are sacrifices that need to be made. And that influencer that you see flashing their six pack on social media, like, you have no idea the level of obsession that they embody. And to live a full life, like, there's obviously more to life than being super lean. And I have had to make sacrifices over the past couple of months to get to even 9% body fat. I've had to turn down like going out to eat as much as I was doing in the past. I've had to prioritize like cooking at home. Like even going out to lunch is something that like I was doing almost every weekday previously, and now I prioritize. For the past 4 months, I prioritize like eating home more. So I'm spending a lot more time like in my house, and those are non-trivial sacrifices. And so I don't plan on keeping that aspect of things up forever. But nonetheless, I think the value of like having attained this skill of knowing how to, when I want to modulate my body fat to this level of, specificity or whatever, I think has been incredibly valuable. So hopefully, or not hopefully, I know that I will at some point, probably even at this phase, because I've already kind of like surpassed the goal that I've initially set for myself. Regain a little bit more like balance, but all that is to say, like the overarching feeling that I've had about this journey has been like it's been a really fun and fascinating one.
Oh, this is definitely fascinating, and I would assume it would be the same for you. A lot of the guests that come on the show, when it comes to weight loss, the two areas of attack are intermittent fasting, so narrowing that eating window, and then cutting down on carbs, which you've mentioned the carb factor. That's not something you've toned down at all. If anything, you've increased them. And then you didn't even mention intermittent fasting. Earlier, you talked about having a high protein breakfast. So no, this is good. We need different opinions, and you have a picture to prove it too. And we can see you here, whoever's watching, like you're living this and it's working for you. And where my curiosity is piqued, and I'm sure a lot of the people that are listening and watching, is the fact that this is so 180 of what I just mentioned there. And we know that is working for people. We know, you've had Dr. Jason Fung on your show, and I've had a number of guests talk about intermittent fasting and narrowing that eating window and keeping insulin down, keeping blood glucose down to melt the fat away. And you're showing it can happen in this totally different paradigm. So talk about how you feel about the paradigm I talked about. Was that kind of how you thought about it before? And then how do you think about that now?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm super happy that we have people talking about intermittent fasting with relation to weight loss, because, you've got to find the form of restriction that's going to feel the least restrictive to you. And so for some people, intermittent fasting is going to be the thing that works. And it's a tool like any other tool. And if it works for you, then that's amazing. I also think that intermittent fasting, specifically time-restricted eating, there's a lot of good data about the value of not eating too late at night from the standpoint of metabolic homeostasis. So I generally try not to eat too close to bedtime. Like that's a 2 or 3 hours before bed is generally when I'm trying to cut off my food consumption. But that's when it comes to body composition, it doesn't make such a huge deal. I will say that eating too late at night can dysregulate some of the hormones that are involved in hunger. So you don't want to be hungry when you're trying to lose fat. And so intermittent fasting can potentially play a role with regard to helping maintain and optimize your hunger levels. But at the end of the day, what you eat still matters more than when you eat. But when you eat is still a variable that matters, and not primarily with regard to body composition, but for other factors that are also important, like metabolic health, blood pressure, blood glucose. I don't know if you've spoken to Sachin Panda, but I mean, we can't discount the research on circadian biology that he's doing and that he's presented. So there's that. But it's just it's a tool, and if it works for you, then great. But also we have to, I think, be mindful of the fact that what most people are eating after dinner, those calories are not coming typically from a good place. Like most people, once they've eaten dinner and they're settling around the couch to binge watch their favorite, the latest Succession, whatever the latest greatest streaming show is, whatever, those calories tend not to come from high protein, healthful food. They tend to come from junk food, whether it's ice cream or, and these foods are enjoyable foods, certainly, but it's they tend to be from hyperpalatable, ultra processed foods. So that's a parameter that like can work for many people. Like to consider the kitchen closed after dinner has been consumed. So I'm not like I'm not like discrediting intermittent fasting or anything like that. It's just that if it's a tool that works for you, then great. But you don't necessarily need to do it. Although it seems to be time restricted eating specifically seems to play a role with regard to metabolic homeostasis and helping to optimize various hormones involved in hunger and satiety and the like. For example, sleep doesn't necessarily sleep doesn't you wouldn't assume that sleep would play a role in like fat loss, right? But sleep is an activity that optimizes your hunger hormones, right? And your ability to emotionally regulate. So if you don't sleep well, if you deprive yourself of adequate sleep, meta-analyses show that a person tends to consume more calories the following day by about 400 to 500 additional calories the following day, and mostly from junk food, right? So it's like there are these other variables that can play a role in our subjective sense of hunger and satiety. And so on any weight loss like plan, yeah, these factors all play a role. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it does ultimately come down to calories in, calories out. The problem, I think, happens when you lead with that, because that doesn't provide the practical information that's going to lead most people to make sustainable behavioral changes in their life. So while energy balance does matter, the problem, I think, comes from like when fitness influencers make it all about calories, right? And they neglect to mention the fact that if you just are moderating the calories from the obesogenic food that you've been consuming your whole life to get you to this obese state, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So again, they matter, but like without talking about the fact that food quality largely dictates the quantity of food that we subsequently eat, without talking about the fact that sleep is so crucially important for helping to optimize our hunger hormones, without talking about the fact that like eating too late at night might also play a role in dysregulating hunger hormones, without being present with your food, we tend to consume about 15% more calories. There's all these other factors, and then the whole protein piece, which of course we've already talked about. I think it's my view is that it's better to lead with those more practical tools like the intermittent fasting, like the food quality bit, because it actually gives people like tactical and practical modifications that they can then start to like engage with and iterate with and experiment with in their own lives. By just focusing on the calories, I think that's a huge mistake. And that's also ultimately the mantra of like the junk food industry, right? Like it's not like our problem that you're overweight. It's the fact that you just weren't able to moderate your consumption of our ice cream or of our high fructose corn syrup sweetened beverages. It's like it's like your fault, But like those foods are not designed to be consumed in moderation. They perpetuate their own overconsumption, right? With like good intentions, like the food manufacturers want to create repeat customers. So yeah, I just think it's like where people tend to put the focus. Like, my view is like I think that the focus needs to be placed on these more helpful and tactile behavioral, modifications. And so I guess that's where like, that's where I think like there should be a seat at the table for intermittent fasting, for all these other like things that people are talking about. It's just like, I think the problems can arise when influencers or even quote unquote diet experts online tend to make the focus like too much about these things and try to make it sound like this is the only way to achieve whatever goal it is that you aspire to achieve. Like intermittent fasting is the only way to lose weight. That's not true. Like, when calories are controlled, there's really no intermittent fasting works, but there's no benefit of intermittent fasting over, a more calorie centric approach. The problem is like a lot of these studies are short term, and you might be able to moderate your consumption of junk food calories for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, maybe even 4 months. But over the long term, unless you have a more practical strategy in place, you're essentially setting yourself up for failure.
One of the other paradigm shifts that you're bringing up a lot throughout our conversation is this calorie piece. And a lot of the influencers these days are saying calories don't matter, don't worry about calories. I know you're not all about calories. I think you're somewhere in between, like I am, where they do matter to a point and they do have some validity. But I want to make sure before we part ways, you have a chance to fully hash out how you feel about calories, because when you start talking about cutting out calories, my brain goes to the body going into a famine state and starting to drop the basal metabolic rate and people having problems when they try to make that shift. How do you feel about that? And then get into the nuance of calories and how you see it.
Yeah. So, you do need to, all of these different diets work. And the mechanism by which they work is they put the person who's the practitioner into a calorie deficit. Right? So some diets will just exclude ultra-processed foods. Some diets will exclude all carbohydrates. Some diets, and they all have different benefits, but ultimately it's about the person has to figure out what diet is going to be most sustainable for them. That's why all diets fail. It's not that diets don't work. It's just that people don't adhere to diets because they adopt this very black and white thinking, like dichotomous mentality about these diets, because you have a lot of people on social media primarily that are like, well, unless you're adhering to the most pristine version of this diet, you're not doing it right. So you got to find the form of restriction, as I've mentioned, that works best for you. Maybe it's intermittent fasting. Maybe it's ketogenic dieting. Maybe it's low carb dieting. All good. They're all good. And there are some advantages, I think a low carb diet is, probably be more sustainable for most than like a low fat diet, but maybe not. I don't know. Everybody's different. When it comes to calories, the more overweight you are, the greater of a calorie deficit you can, basically the less you can eat, and the more rapid your weight loss can be, without experiencing, a lot of the sort of essentially the side effects that one might experience in a leaner state, because you've got more fat to lose. So there's just more energy available in the body for building and maintaining muscle, and going about your daily activities and the like. The leaner you get, it becomes, you have to cut out. It becomes more difficult. It's a lot easier to go from 16% body fat to 12% body fat than it is to go from 10% body fat to 8% body fat. It becomes a lot more difficult. And so, part of what happens is metabolic adaptation, which includes this reduction in NEAT, which is non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which you're not even conscious of this, but you'll notice, maybe you're fidgeting less. Your body just burns fewer calories. It's not that you've damaged your metabolism or anything like that, but you can generally bring it up by integrating a few refeed days here and there. But no, calories, they're they matter. What can I say? But it's important to know where your calories are coming from, because that matters as well. Protein calories are your body doesn't store protein as fat. You're made of fat. It can, but it's very difficult for your body to do. And your body, it wouldn't make sense from an evolutionary standpoint for your body to prioritize storing protein as fat. Fat, on the other hand, is very easily stored as fat, and so is carbohydrates once you've overconsumed them and triggered de novo lipogenesis. Your body can create fat from carbohydrates. And so that's why at the end of the day, the data shows that the ratio of carbohydrates to fat in your diet doesn't so much matter when protein is controlled. When protein is controlled, when you're getting adequate protein, it really is up to you to determine what mixture of carbohydrates and fat is going to be the most enjoyable to you to sustain that calorie deficit so that you can continue to lose weight on a consistent basis. And so that's why I think it's problematic that you see so many people that are in the diet wars, low carb is better, low fat is better. People might lose weight quicker on a low carb diet at the onset, but that's primarily water weight that they're losing. At the end of the day, it really doesn't, there's no strong evidence that suggests that one is any better than the other. It just ultimately comes down to like what's going to be the most sustainable for you,
Have you experimented with going the other way and cutting out carbs totally and doing a carnivore diet? Because this is something in the weight loss realm, in the health world in general, it seems to be taking things by storm. Have you played with it, and how do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I've done keto in the past, and keto, you can lose fat on a ketogenic diet as well. But I had a bit of a revelation when, over the course of the pandemic, I took up boxing. And I would I used to do like a lot of my workouts fasted. And so I started boxing fasted. And one day there was like a shift in my schedule and I wasn't able to go fasted. So I actually ate something, and I ate something I think pretty carbohydrate heavy prior to my session, and I had way more energy. And I subsequently noticed that when I had when I was like replete with glycogen before my boxing workouts, I had tons more energy, and it was like, I wouldn't bonk as quickly, because boxing is a very intense workout. I mean, I was like one-on-one trainer with like a professional boxer. And that was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, where I really, in that context, realized the value that carbohydrates can potentially play in exercise performance. And like, you hear stories all the time of professional athletes like, experimenting with low carb ketogenic diets, but by and large, most professional athletes, and again, ultimately like bodybuilders and the like, they're utilizing carbohydrates as a performance enhancing tool. And I've always talked about carbohydrates as a performance enhancing tool. That's really their best, aside from the value of fiber, which, is like a whole different rabbit hole to go down. Carbohydrates should be utilized for their ability to enhance physical performance. And so that was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, where I started, consuming carbs pre-workout. And, my resistance training workouts were, have always been really good. But yeah, I started to notice like a greater sense of energy. Not that I felt like some sort of caffeinated. I think that's like a misconception that a lot of people have, that carbohydrates are going to like jack you up like caffeine. That's not how it works. It's just you're able to pump out like one or two more reps when you've had like, carbohydrates in your system with like a given exercise, because you've got more like glycogen stored in your muscles. And so I think like, look, there are people on social media that get, in fantastic shape with low carb diets and the like. So, I don't want to, trash talk low carb diets. And also for people with like, going back to the brain health piece, like if I had a neurological condition, I would absolutely be experimenting with ketogenic dieting. I've always said that. The research is just like, it's too important to overlook. But with regard to like, physical performance, body composition, I think it's worth a try, especially for people who've been told that to lose fat, you got to cut out all the carbohydrates. I just think it's like important to like kind of dispel that myth. I don't even want to say it's misinformation, because people tend to experience success with a diet and they want to proselytize, the diet that's worked for them. And I don't hold that against anybody, but yeah, I mean, it's, if you can, I think the more access points that people have to sustainable, flexible dieting, the better. And so this is just sort of my N of one experience. And I hope it, provided value.
Have you ever, say for 30 days a week, totally cut out carbs though and just had meat? Went full carnivore?
Full carnivore? No, I've never done that.
Just to see how you feel and see what your performance is like.
Yeah, I've never done that. I don't think I like to have more diversity in my diet. And I like vegetables. I like salads. I like, my hypothesis is that a lot of these carnivore dieters just don't like vegetables. They don't like the way they taste. Obviously there are some people who do better symptomatically with various like autoimmune conditions when they cut out some of these plant compounds. I'm not denying that, but I love dietary diversity, and I think it's important to integrate. We're seeing now compounds like dietary flavonols. There's new evidence to suggest that they can help slow cognitive aging. which are essentially plant defense compounds. We know the value that plant pigments like carotenoids play in eye and brain health. So I do think that there are many valuable compounds offered to us by plants. That being said, I do probably owe it to myself to experiment with a carnivore diet the same way that I've experimented with this. I am, at the end of the day, somebody who enjoys experimenting with different dietary paradigms, but I don't think that these dietary extremes are the way. I really don't. I think that a carnivore diet is a great elimination diet for somebody who's experiencing mysterious symptoms and wants to potentially do the most extreme form of an elimination diet there is. But I don't think it's like a long-term solution. There's not a lot of good data on it. And again, I think there's a lot of good to be gained from plants. So yeah, maybe someday, but I haven't as of yet, Jesse.
All right, we're going to end on this. Hypothetical situation, somebody can't exercise. So maybe they're extremely overweight. They're 300, 350 pounds. They just can't work out at this point. They want to lose weight. Or their schedule is just so demanding that they realistically can't work out on a regular basis. In that case, could you see value in cutting out carbs all the way to a carnivore diet, or just taking them down to, say, 50 grams of carbs a day, given that they're not going to be moving their body a whole lot?
Yeah, I think for people with like metabolic dysfunction, cutting the carbohydrates is a good strategy. At the very least, there seems to be you'd probably get away with less medication, from a glucose regulation standpoint, with a reduction in glycemic load. I didn't start from a place of metabolic dysfunction, so that's why I didn't, I feel my body knows how to process carbohydrates. I'm also very active. For somebody who's not super active, yeah, I think that would probably be my my strategy, like to take a more low carbohydrate approach. For one, because you're not really, as in this hypothetical, you have no need for those dietary carbohydrates, right? So I would do a low carb diet. The one caveat that I would add is I would prioritize non-starchy vegetables. So like vegetables that are rich in fiber, which is also satiating. And I would also make sure that the fats that I'm ingesting were primarily, healthful monounsaturated fats, like from olive oil, avocado oil. And I would still be opting for the lean meats. I wouldn't be going overboard with the saturated fat and the like. I would still be doing, because like in an obese person, you probably already have some degree of lipid dysregulation, right? Maybe, possibly not, but like in all likelihood, there's probably already some degree of lipid dysregulation. I would, healthy fats, dietary fiber, lots of protein, and yeah, I think a low carb strategy in that situation would be, totally reasonable.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
Protein is an essential nutrient, and we need a relatively large amount of it every day for good health. I think that one of the biggest dietary villains, if you want to call it that, of the standard American food environment is the proliferation